Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Engaging and Recognizing Employees During the COVID-19 Pandemic and Beyond, presented by Brandon Hall Group. Brandon Hall Group is a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. Our vision is to inspire a better workplace experience. We have world-class research, data, and expertise across all areas in human capital management. Currently, we have open surveys in planning beyond COVID-19, learning measurement, and career development. We would love to hear from you. In exchange, you could receive free research reports and more. To participate, please visit our website, www.brandonhall.com, and click on Open Surveys. And finally, a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded. The playback will be provided to everyone within 24 hours of the webinar in a follow-up email. If you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing into the questions box for our presenters. If you'd like to download a copy of the presentation instantly, you may find it in the handout section. Before we introduce our presenters, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Achievers. Achievers is an employee voice and recognition platform that has been partnering with companies around the world to elevate their employee engagement and retention strategies for the last 19 years. Achievers leverages the science behind behavior change, so your people and your organization can experience sustainable, data-driven business results anywhere in the world. And today's presenters for engaging and recognizing employees during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond will be Claude Werder and Brie Harvey. Claude, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role?
Thanks, Danny. Be glad to. Hello, everyone. I head up Brandon Hall Group's research and advisory practices on talent management, which includes employee engagement and recognition, as well as leadership development and diversity and inclusion. And before joining Brandon Hall Group, I had the honor of managing corporate teams for almost 30 years, ranging from 5 people to 250. And so I'm a huge advocate of working closely with employees to maximize their performance and give them the best employee experience possible. And joining me today is employee engagement evangelist, Brie Harvey. Brie, tell us a little bit about your background and your role at Achievers.
Thanks, Claude. I'm so happy to be here today. A little about me. I spent the first 8 years of my career in talent acquisition before pivoting to the lovely world of training and development. I currently work as an employee engagement evangelist, which allows me to work really closely with the research arm of Achievers, the Workforce Institute. And I swear, I'm not just saying this, I truly think I have the best job in the entire world because I get to spend my days researching, writing, and speaking about what the most progressive organizations are doing to enhance their people strategy and how that translates into business performance. The only big drawback of my role is actually experienced by all the people in my personal life who have to hear me talk incessantly about the latest trends in human capital management. Apparently, not everyone is as fascinated by employee engagement and culture as I am. But today, I'm in good company with Claude and all of you who joined us. Before we get into the agenda, I wanted to talk more broadly for a second about why we're here. 2 weeks ago, the Pew Research Center showed that nearly 9 out of 10 Americans claim their lives have been upended in some way by the novel coronavirus. Personally, I live in San Francisco, which was one of the first cities to instate shelter in place. I share my perfect but small apartment with my partner, who volunteered himself to work at a COVID-19 center as a healthcare provider. Walking through the empty streets of my neighborhood, seeing the boarded up businesses, and legitimately wondering about whether he's going to have the proper protective gear for his shift that day is a dramatic reminder of how much has changed in the world in such a short period. Right now, organizations around the globe are twisting themselves into knots, scrambling to pivot plans because of this rapidly changing situation. There's lots of talk of business continuity, and although operational questions are obviously important right now, it's equally, if not more critical, we don't lose sight over what we all know is our most valuable asset, our people. It's virtually impossible to avoid the unrelenting stream of news about the downward trajectory of the economy, layoffs, budget cuts, and deaths. So it's totally understandable that as we all begin to feel the strain of social isolation and the lines between our home and our work lives blur, workplace anxiety is at an all-time high. And as a result, many organizations are experiencing waning employee productivity and morale. Although this is the most unusual and disruptive event most of us have experienced in our lives, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the long-term implications on the collective mindset of the workforce, the good news is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel in trying to confront this crisis because the core character of humanity remains the same. Businesses and leaders need to focus on controlling the controllables. And the reason I'm so thrilled about today's discussion is because it's centered on doing just that, doubling down on what works and spotlighting practical solutions rooted in research so you can optimize your next move forward. A quick overview of our time together today. We're going to be deconstructing 3 realities that HR leaders are grappling with and exploring what can be done to address them in the most efficient way possible. So we'll start by talking about the fact we're in, and we have been in, the age of disruption, and HR will have to do less with less. We'll examine the critical role employee engagement plays. Then we'll address the reality that virtual work environments are becoming the new normal, and it's imperative for organizations to react and focus on cultivating employee experiences that foster trust, connection, and drive productivity across remote teams. Then we're going to dive into the reality that during times of high stress, employees have a heightened need to be listened to and seen and heard, and regularly listening to their feedback and acting on it is the secret sauce to building resilient and agile teams. Lastly, before we open up the floor to take some of your questions, we're going to try and tie it into a neat little bow for you with some key takeaways.
All right, so I'm excited for this. The first reality we're going to unpack is something we at Brandon Hall Group have written extensively about. Even before the pandemic, we had entered an era of business and digital transformation. The pace of business is not slowing. Only the agile who can adapt to the frequent and substantial changes in the market are going to be able to thrive. For many organizations, the implications of the pandemic may involve budget cuts and layoffs, and HR is going to have to figure out how to work with less, as Brie said. It's imperative for HR leaders to ensure they cut out the noise and focus only on high-impact initiatives. And I can't say this enough. Just because we're in a global pandemic doesn't change the fact that the single most reliable predictor lever for business success across the board has been and will always be engaged employees. And the funny thing about employee engagement is even though so many organizations claims it's a top priority, a lot of confusion exists around it and what it actually is. So part of the confusion stems from the fact that there are many definitions of engagement. In our research, more than half of organizations indicated that 7 separate definitions of engagement were valid. We at Brandon Hall Group believe the best and most actionable definition is this: employee engagement is an outcome driven by the quality of everyday employee experiences. So what that means is that all the little things employees encounter every day, right? From clocking in to their physical workplace, their technology, their relationship with their managers, their connections with their peers, all of those things determine how they feel about their experience, and it drives their level of engagement. Which, brings us to our first poll question that we want to run by you. We want to level set and get your thoughts about where you all are in your engagement journey. How would you rate the overall engagement of your organization's workforce as it stands now? Your choices are poorly engaged, or meaning actively disengaged, somewhat engaged, moderately engaged, highly engaged, or maybe not sure given the current situation. So we look forward to seeing what you have to say, and then we'll try to help in whatever way we can. Give you a few seconds to weigh in. Andy, let us know when we've got a good sample. So let's see. So let's see, about half of you say moderately engaged, about a quarter highly engaged. This is interesting. I expected a little bit higher percentage saying not sure given the pandemic, which is actually good to see. So you seem to have a pretty good feel for where you are in your situation. So the fact that basically 3/4 of you feel your folks are moderately or highly engaged is really good. And so you're in a position to really build upon that and even make more progress as you go forward during the pandemic and beyond.
I love that. And for those 9% of you who selected you're not sure, Achievers is offering a free critical events survey and toolkit, so you can get visibility into how employees are doing during this time and what to do about it. I will put the link in the chat box for anyone that's interested.
Great. And so let's move on. So unfortunately, the dire reality that many organizations are facing, apparently not this crowd so much, but in our research, that a lot of people are facing in this coronavirus shakeup is that margins are shrinking or have completely disappeared. It's imperative for HR leaders to acknowledge that disengaged employees can have a catastrophic impact on the health of a business in current conditions. Now, even before the pandemic, our engagement research, which we did in January, showed that low employee engagement is one of the biggest risks an organization can have. Employers are twice as likely to say employees are somewhat engaged or actively engaged than highly engaged. Our research has shown for years one of the most important and, in my opinion, simplest things that employers and leaders can do to drive engagement is recognition. Recognizing and appreciating employees for their contributions have proven time and time again to be one of the best ways to drive long-lasting engagement. Now, we released our 2020 Culture of Recognition report a couple months ago, and it showed that organizations that rate their culture of recognition highly are 3 times more likely to see increased employee retention, 2.5 times more likely to see improved engagement scores, and they also have stronger employer brands. Brie?
I love those stats, Claude. So now it's time for our next poll. We want to hear your thoughts about how you would rate your organization's culture of recognition. You can answer this from the current state or in general, how much your organization embraced recognition before the pandemic. It doesn't matter. But would you say, A, you have a poor to non-existent culture of recognition, B, it's developing, C, pretty good, or D, excellent? Part of me wishes that there was a way to pick more than one answer, because here at Achievers, we're like over the top with recognition, but at the same time, it's always developing because we're assimilating new leaders and team members and always trying to find new ways of making sure our people feel appreciated.
It'll be interesting what the scores are here, because what I've found is that while most people rate engagement high, the level of recognition is lower. So let's see what folks say.
Lots of developing, 13% poor to non-existent, 7% excellent. I love that.
Which is great.
35% good, yeah. Okay, I love to see that there was relatively a small number of people who claimed their approach is non-existent to poor, because that really collaborates with data from World at Work's recent Trends on Recognition report, which shows that most companies have some form of recognition in place. Typically, it's a mix of formal and informal. However, you wouldn't know by just asking employees. According to Achiever's 2020 report on engagement and retention, 82% of employees claim they aren't adequately recognized. So, Claude, we have this interesting situation where, as you pointed out, there's a mountain of evidence clearly highlighting the insane benefits of recognition and its impact on engagement and business success. And most companies have some kind of recognition in place, but employees don't really feel appreciated. What is your take on the disconnect?
Yeah, I like how you teed that up. So the issue is that although all recognition is good, not all recognition approaches have the same impact. As we point out in our report, most organizations focus their recognition strategy around awarding major milestones, such as, for instance, years of service. Although, it's great to acknowledge and celebrate work anniversaries, it's not a very effective way of driving performance and engagement. Which brings me to the other major limitation that inhibits recognition's impact, and it has to do with frequency of recognition. It's impossible to truly build a culture of recognition unless it happens regularly.
Yes, Claude, not enough companies realize that recognition simply doesn't work unless it's happening regularly, on the regular. In fact, nothing in life works if it's not regular. You'd never do 4 to 6 at-home workouts a year and expect bodily transformation. Recognition and your employees is no different. All of the wonderful benefits that you just went over of recognition are unfortunately extremely short-lived, much shorter-lived than organizations previously assumed 8 or 10 years ago. The Workforce Institute has an insight paper that shows what happens in the brain when someone receives a recognition, and 2 things are clear. First, there's a little hit of dopamine, which results in a temporary emotional high that contributes to creative problem solving, improved performance, a sense of belonging, but then poof, it's gone almost as quickly as it came.
Yes, and the proof about the importance of recognition frequency is in the pudding, so to speak. Organizations that promote frequent recognition are 41% more likely to see increased retention, according to our research, and 34% more likely to see increased engagement.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add is acknowledging your unsung heroes and above and beyond performance regularly is even more important during organizational and societal disruption. At Achievers, we are very proud that the critical role recognition plays in uniting and connecting employees in these post-coronavirus conditions hasn't been lost on our customers. Since the pandemic, we've seen a 48% increase in recognition across our customer base, which represents over 300 organizations that collectively employ almost 4 million people around the globe, which I think is pretty amazing. Now, Claude, at this point, some of our listeners might be wondering, how often does recognition need to be? Tell us your take on recognition frequency.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think leaders everywhere should be asking right now that question. Our research shows that the sweet spot where we see significant impact to engagement is when organizations are averaging at least 1 unique recognition received per employee per month. And from everything I can see in the market during COVID-19, that is probably low. Looking at the early data of how the mental well-being of Americans has been impacted by the crisis, Expressing gratitude in the workplace should probably happen even more often than the benchmarks we recommended at the release of this report a few months ago. I've found that as I talk to people, I've interviewed a lot of companies, they are really stressing the need to do this much more often. And what's going to be interesting is, as the crisis hopefully subsides, will that level of recognition, that frequency of recognition continue to hold and people continue to do it, or will it return back to the old norms? So Brie, obviously Achievers has been in the recognition space for the last 2 decades, and I know your benchmark for companies is just 1 recognition per month. How often do you get pushback on that?
Absolutely. It's a great question. We actually get pushback on that fairly often. And when people are coming from a more traditional approach with their recognition strategy, 1 recognition per employee month can sound like a lot, not to mention expensive. So it's helpful to first level set about what we even mean by employee recognition. The Workforce Institute developed a recognition maturity model that distinguishes recognition approaches into 3 categories. The first being recognition 1.0, where recognition tends to be very top-down, more annual in frequency, and not really linked to an individual's performance or behavior. The second category is recognition 2.0, which may have some performance-based recognition like nomination-based awards or spot bonuses, but this category of recognition is still characterized by primarily top-down recognition, perhaps with manager approvals. And the key thing to note is that the recognition frequency is low and it tends to be very focused on rewards. The final paradigm of recognition is 3.0. And although this model will support some traditional recognition initiatives like years of service or nomination-based awards, it's fundamentally different because of its emphasis on frequent, non-monetary, peer-led recognition and the approach to rewards. Now, although there's absolutely a time and a place for rewards, motivating employees by dangling carrots and incentives has shown to have a weak exchange rate with today's knowledge worker. At Achievers, we believe you can't reach optimal recognition levels or truly establish a culture of appreciation without decoupling rewards from recognition, so they're seen in the eyes of employees as being separate. The good news is that non-monetary recognition has proven to be just as powerful as monetary recognition in terms of having a sustainable, lasting impact on engagement and performance. The Workforce Institute conducted this correlation study displayed on the screen for one of our US-based retail customers. And basically what we did is we mapped non-monetary recognitions received to employee engagement scores. And we found that people who averaged receiving just 1 monetary recognition per month were 43% more engaged than those who didn't.
Hey, I love this data point because it should be reassuring to everyone about the fact that even though we're in this pandemic, and organizations are being budget conscious, non-monetary peer-led recognition can and should play a vital role in driving recognition frequency and employee engagement. Now, as we uncover in our report, although emphasizing frequent non-monetary recognition is one of the most impactful strategies companies can employ to optimize workplace gratitude, it isn't the only thing. The other key consideration involves making recognition inclusive and democratized. Now that means that employees should be able to recognize each other from every location, whether they're working remotely, temporarily, or permanently. All your people need to be empowered to call out the great work that's being done on the front lines without regard to job level or title. Recognition needs to be inclusive and democratized, and flow not just from the top down, but from the bottom up and everything in between. However, according to our most recent report on recognition, only 34% of organizations claim they support inclusive recognition, which is, just crazy to me because it's just common sense and relatively easy. Just think about some of the biggest lessons learned in human capital management over the last 15 years, right? It's clear that top-down initiatives are no longer effective in this age of work. Your recognition program should be no different. We believe this disconnect can be explained when we look at the usage of recognition and rewards technology. Again, this is the era where HR will have to figure out how to effectively work with less. Building a true culture of recognition that yields frequent peer-to-peer recognition requires scaling with the right technology. And rewards and recognition technology users, according to our research, are 72% more likely to rate their culture of recognition highly than non-technology users. Conversely, organizations without recognition technology are 160% more likely to recognize employees just twice a year or less, which, of course, as we've already covered, simply is not enough to make any kind of impact on engagement.
Yeah, and I love that you point out how technology is necessary to scale recognition so it's available for geographically dispersed or remote employee populations, because it actually brings us to the second reality HR leaders around the world are trying to solve for at the moment, which is that virtual work environments will become the new normal. They've been becoming the new normal as desperately as many companies out there want to resist it. Even before the coronavirus, remote work was up over 140% over the last 10 years. And it's imperative for leaders to re-examine the employee experience, how they unite employees, and effectively maintain morale and drive productivity as we brace ourselves for an economic downturn. Again, when we talk about controlling the controllables, there's nothing you can do to influence macro level market conditions, but providing employees with a meaningful experience and giving people a reason to show up to work other than a paycheck is something you can control. Now, from what we've seen this last month within our customer base, which is, again, comprised of hundreds of organizations from virtually all sectors, from McDonald's to GM to the NBA, since the outbreak, a clear pattern has emerged with distinct phases organizations have to work through as they try to stabilize. The first phase was all about protecting the health and safety of employees. For organizations with essential workers like healthcare and retail who don't have the option of working virtually, this is a continuous ongoing effort, and employee safety and health remains very much at the forefront. However, for companies who primarily employ knowledge workers, the first phase entailed dealing with the logistical nightmare of getting everyone to work from home in a very short period of time, getting the infrastructure up and running, and so on. But once that was all taken care of and employees have the basic equipment they need to perform their core job functions, the next phase companies typically launch into is about addressing the employee experience and thinking about how they can meet those higher level emotional needs of employees and engendering psychological safety in an effort to boost productivity levels back to normal.
Yes, and the employee experience and what employers get wrong here is a central theme of a lot of our work. One of the most commonly misunderstood concepts has to do with the fact that when employees reflect upon the employee experience, they don't analyze their overall experience or benefits, perks, or equipment. They focus on conversations with leaders, interactions with peers, and the messages and the things that they see and hear and do on a daily basis. As we explore in Brandon Hall Group's employee experience model, creating a strong employee experience that leads to genuinely engaged employees who consistently give discretionary effort, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's dynamic and requires careful examination across many areas of your people strategy. However, our research shows that organizations most often fail employees on a personal level. And what I mean by this is on this list is they struggle to provide meaningful appreciation to employees. They fail to earn employees' trust. They don't have strong leadership, and they struggle to clearly communicate employees' goals. So when you look at this list and consider that many employees are feeling the pangs of social isolation and increased stress right now, one way you can bring to life the organization's short and long-term goals and move the needle on the employee experience immediately is by, on the next slide, encouraging and enabling employees, leaders, and managers to send specific, meaningful, timely, and transparent recognition, because that's really the biggest gap, is those two things. So Brie, why don't you unpack each of these in a little more detail and talk about why they're especially relevant right now?
Sure. So first I'm going to talk about the importance of the transparency of recognition. There are several key benefits of making recognition moments visible to your entire employee population, one of which is that recognition moments become amplified across the organization instead of being fleeting one-off moments that happen between a manager and employee. Being congratulated in private about something I did is certainly better than not being acknowledged at all. But when my peers and leaders have visibility into my contribution, it really does result in an extra buzz and sense of pride. Furthermore, having a social and public component to the recognition encourages all employees, regardless of where they are or what their job is, to join in on celebrating the accomplishment, which fosters inclusion, belonging, and serves to break down silos and barriers created by distance or time zones. Especially right now with so much bad news in the world, having a virtual forum to showcase all the awesome work that's being done across the company so people can internalize all the things that are actually going well can really reduce anxiety and give employees confidence that the organization is heading in the right direction. I read somewhere that when managers work in the same location as an employee, at most, they can get 30% visibility on all the work that a person is doing on a daily basis. Not surprisingly, that percentage drops when workers are remote. So having that public element to all peer recognitions not only empowers leaders and managers to actually gain direct line of sight into the good work happening within their teams, but it enables them to be a coach and communicate which behaviors they need to see more of. The next consideration for recognition to have maximum impact on enhancing the employee experience actually costs nothing to implement. And it has to do with the specificity of the recognition and ensuring that it ties back to your core values. Studies on employee performance show the more meaningful, specific, and personalized your recognition is, the stronger the impact will be on the receiver and their performance.
Yes, and I'd just add, Brie, that right now it's clear that workplace stress is at an all-time high, and during periods of high stress and disruption, employees have a heightened need to see that connection between their daily contributions and the organization's mission and purpose. Saying something like, "Hey, thanks for being awesome," is not meaningful, and it doesn't lead to improved employee performance and value alignment. Being specific about exactly why a person's behavior was valuable or exemplary and how it ties, into the overarching mission and goals of the organization is more important than ever. And to your point, it's something you can do for free.
I love that. Everyone loves free tips right now. Okay, so the final best practice that will result in creating conditions to optimize psychological safety has to do with appreciating people in a timely manner.
Yep, that's true. And I know that providing timely recognition may seem like a no-brainer, but according to our studies, even before COVID-19 shook things up, only 36% of organizations were enabled to support timely recognition, which is really kind of crazy because it's just common sense, right? If you have people going above and beyond to deliver on your mission and they're feeling overwhelmed, juggling childcare and domestic responsibilities and who knows what else, what use is recognizing them for their hard work months after the situation stabilizes? Doesn't make any sense. It's difficult to overstate the importance of recognizing good performance in real time, which again ties into the importance of technology as we discussed. But the same thing applies when we're not in crisis. Timeliness is really everything.
Yes. I love that. And Claude, you better recognize me after this. No, I'm kidding. Now, I wanted to share two quick examples of how all of this plays together in the real world to really elevate the employee experience in a meaningful way and serve to immediately inject newfound energy and resilience into your employee base. So what you're looking at here on the screen is an actual recognition I recently sent to one of our solution consultants. Things have been pretty hectic at Achievers for a lot of reasons. One of them being we hired a bunch of people right before the pandemic, and then suddenly we were all required to work from home. And in the recognition, I basically told my coworker, Erin, how much I appreciated her taking the time to edit an article I wrote, even though it's totally outside the scope of her job. And I knew she was slammed with helping new hires and clients. And what I love is that within the first hour of the recognition going live on our newsfeed, her boss, our CEO, Jeff Cates, and a few others commented on it, thanking her for the impact she's having on the company. The cherry on top was the fact that the recognition got boosted a couple of times, which is basically a one quick way for managers or leaders to piggyback on a recognition by adding a small reward to communicate to not just the receiver of the recognition, but the sender and the entire company that, hey, yes, this is the type of behavior we need to double down on right now. And when Erin reached out to me to thank me for the recognition, she mentioned that she had been having a really long, hard, frustrating week, and she had been feeling kind of overwhelmed and alone, and seeing my recognition and the comments from everyone, especially our CEO, really lifted her spirits and reminded her why she loves working here, which totally made my day as well. The second and the last example I'm going to share is a recent recognition sent from an executive of a major supermarket we work with. And I think this is a beautiful demonstration about the importance of values-based recognition within the current environment. Basically, what happened pretty much overnight is they found themselves in a position where store managers and district management had been working around the clock to get up to speed with the new COVID-19 health and safety guidelines. Their warehouse and distribution staff had been working on overdrive to replenish shelves as quickly as possible, and their storefront employees were working longer shifts. They were dealing with a lot more distressed customers with less employee coverage due to an uptick in absenteeism. And everyone was feeling understandably stressed, trying to do their jobs while complying with the new regulations to keep themselves, their families, and their customers safe. And what makes this recognition such a powerful example is that he's so explicit with making that tie between their daily work grind and their sacrifice and how it fits into the overall mission of the organization, which is all about serving the communities. I'm telling you, the secret sauce for recognition to truly transform culture and the employee experience is having them be transparent, specific, values-based, and timely. And as a way to give back to all of you and the HR community, Achievers is offering free appreciation cards for you to practice sending specific, meaningful, and timely words of appreciation to your coworkers or your family or your friends. I'm going to include the link in the chat box here. But so now that we have covered the reality that HR has to do less with less, and the importance of focusing on the employee experience, employee engagement by leveraging regular recognition. Now that we've talked about the fact that remote work is real, it's big, and it's one of the most effective ways of cultivating remote employee experiences that breed high performance cultures, is doubling down on what works by enabling transparent, meaningful, timely appreciation. We're going to wrap things up with delving into our third reality, which has to do with the fact that right now, workplace stress is at an all-time high. And during periods of high stress and disruption, employees have a heightened need to feel heard and seen, and the role of employee feedback and taking action is more important than ever.
Agreed. And in our 2020 employee engagement study, we explored the 10 most important actions to impact employee engagement over the next couple of years. Toward the top of the list was listening to employee feedback and taking action on that feedback more often. Also enabling teamwork and collaboration, and building an environment of trust. Continuous listening has been a buzzword within HR circles for years now. And although some leaders may feel tempted to kind of buckle down and focus on addressing short-term business operations and kind of leaving other things like checking back with employees to later, it's really even more important now to open up those lines of communication and feedback during these tumultuous times. And it can also build new habits that can translate back into the post-pandemic environment. A slew of studies, ours and many others, show that when employees feel like their voices aren't being heard, it can impact trust and psychological safety, which can have devastating implications on things like team collaboration, innovation, and performance. Additionally, empowering frontline managers and leaders with critical information they need to be proactive instead of reactive in resolving short-term problems will result in more agile decision-making and addressing smaller issues before they escalate. One thing I think, too many organizations glaze over is that employee listening and feedback is only half of the puzzle. Again, taking decisive and regular action to feedback is paramount to communicate to employees that you care and their experience matters. And Brie, I know a lot of your customers have been using the employee voice component of the Achievers platform to collect real-time employee feedback and facilitate manager action during the pandemic. Share with us, if you will, just how this plays out in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to the pandemic, we have a banking customer that basically had a non-existent work from home policy. And like a lot of organizations, they were essentially forced to pivot to a virtual work environment with very little notice. And the first 2 weeks of being fully remote, it was clear within our employee voice platform that the overall mood of employees dropped quite a bit. And the HR team knew they had to be proactive about re-energizing the culture and providing employees with a new way to connect. And I think they did a pretty awesome job rolling out a series of virtual culture events, happy hours, and they even did this like a gaming themed event with avatar-based socialization. But as we all know, culture initiatives are never one and done. They're never one size fits all. And through our platform, some comments started to surface about the fact that employees felt there were some things left to be desired with the meetups. Namely, they hadn't thought through the fact that there was a segment of their employee population who didn't have a strong appetite for alcohol-forward, gaming-themed happy hours, because as the end of their workday neared, the reality for them was they had kids at home to take care of. And it wasn't that they didn't want to be team players and they didn't want to participate, but they felt excluded. So as soon as they started seeing some of those comments come in, the culture team was like, that's totally fair. In fact, one of the HR team members was like, yeah, I actually haven't even been able to join any of the meetups because they happen at the same time I'm making dinner for my kids who are running around wild by that hour of the day. So in response, what they rolled out, and I love this, was something they called Family Yappy Hour, which was a meetup where everybody, including employees with kids or restless partners or parents or fur babies, were encouraged to connect, but a little bit earlier in the workday. And I know that this solution sounds simple, but this is truly what makes people seen and heard and appreciated, not just in times of crisis and change, but in general, when employees give the gift of their observation and unfiltered, authentic experience, and the company listens, understands, and acts, that's the juice, in my opinion. Claude, what do you think?
Yeah, and what I love about the example you just shared is responding to employee feedback. It doesn't always have to be this massive ongoing initiative. You know, sometimes when people say you have to take action, it's like, oh, I gotta go crazy here. You know, action can simply mean making minor tweaks to an existing plan or policy, or as simple as communicating with employees that you're going to work on their concerns and that you're working on identifying solutions. The goal isn't necessarily to have an answer for every single thing an employee might be concerned about, but embracing the fact that they have concerns and bringing them along with you in your journey to find a solution.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that I'm so sad we only have 13 minutes left and we have so many good questions. So before we get to some of these very specific and awesome questions, I wanted to wrap up with some key takeaways. First and foremost, we need to accept we're in the age of disruption and change. The pace of business isn't slowing. HR is going to have to figure out how to get things done with less resources. And to your point, Jenny, yeah, it's kind of like less, more with less. It's critical for you to focus on areas that will make the biggest impact to the trajectory of the business. And in this case, the level of engagement of employees is what will separate the resilient from those who will experience more struggles. And as Clyde pointed out, the most reliable and predictable way to foster engagement and maintain morale entails encouraging frequent inclusive recognition. It's impossible to do that without embracing non-monetary recognition and making recognition easy and available to everyone through technology. Secondly, we discussed why virtual work environments are the new normal and why it's imperative for leaders to re-examine how they connect teams, foster trust, and motivate remote employees. Authentic and meaningful specific recognition that's public and real time is imperative for building teams and trust within virtual or in-office environments. The third reality HR needs to contend with is the fact during times of crisis and change, the need for employees to provide feedback, the need for HR to elicit and welcome and take into account that feedback is absolutely vital. Woo! Clyde, we have so many good questions.
We do, and I've jotted some of them down. Let's they're pretty short and to the point, but demand some explanation. So let's start maybe with, there were a few questions related to the idea of transparent recognition. And people pointed out that not every employee likes to get recognized, especially in public. And how do you, do what we've talked about while also respecting, the wishes of employees?
Yeah, it's
You want
such
to
a
tackle
good
that first?
question. Yeah, totally. It's a really good question, and one that we actually get asked often, because people are like, well, what if someone's like shy and it's embarrassing for their recognition moment to be blasted across the company? And what we always say to that is, as you're kind of evaluating technology solution providers, it's important that the solution is set up in a way that's configurable so that people have kind of like are a little bit in the driver's seat of being able to select whether or not they want their recognition to be displayed company-wide. But what we have found within our own customer base is that less than 1% of the time, I think it's like 0.01% of the time, people actually select that. And so it's a little bit more of the exception than the rule. I think that oftentimes when people talk about public recognition and it being embarrassing, it's a lot of times that's in person, in real life, when people are being called out and like their face is all red. But in an electronic kind of virtual environment, having their recognitions displayed and transparent generally isn't something that most employees, from what we've seen within our employee base, like want to conceal. Although I am embarrassed even to get recognized in person. My face turns red. I like this one from Carol. Thank you. And I'm curious to get your take on balancing authentic recognition with the recognition frequency. I understand both are important, but we have a manager who takes time during his team meetings to recognize every person, and sometimes there are people who haven't done something specific or meaningful to deserve a recognition, and his recognitions can come across as a little general and contrived. What advice do you have about balancing regularity and the authenticity of recognition?
Yeah, great question.
It's such a good question, yeah. And it's actually not one that I get a lot, but here's the thing. It's never advisable under any circumstance to recognize someone if they haven't done something really specific that drives the business forward, because it does diminish the value of the recognition. Sometimes when I'm talking to HR leaders about why at least one recognition per employee per month is the magic number, sometimes they'll be like, gosh, that sounds like a lot. Doesn't that devalue the recognition because people kind of get desensitized? And the answer is no. As long as the recognition is specific, right, meaningful, and values-based, there's no such thing as too much recognition. Now, recognizing people for fluffy reasons like, Claude, thanks for bringing us Krispy Kreme donuts, on the other hand, that's not valuable, and it can be demotivating. Like, imagine if you were a person on that manager's team when he's going around and arbitrarily thanking every single person. Imagine if you had completed this amazing project and he's like, hey, thanks for showing up to work with a great attitude. It would be almost insulting. Like, it would have the opposite effect and make you feel like he didn't notice the awesome thing that you just did. So in summary, if I were you, Carol, I would gently remind him and all of your leaders that they should only recognize people who have exhibited behavior they want to see more of, because what gets recognized, especially publicly, gets repeated. And inauthentic, vague praise doesn't really lead to pumping people up.
Right. The other thing I want to just bring up is I think we're kind of in the questions, I think we're defaulting here a little bit to the idea that recognition equals public recognition. And I think there's certainly a place for public recognition. We've talked some about that. But I think the one-on-one recognition is equally or more valuable. And I don't think there are many people who don't want to be recognized. They may not want to be recognized in front of 100 people or in a social platform, but they might very well want to be recognized one-to-one, either face-to-face or in an email or in a post to that particular person. And I think even if they're not a big fan and they tend to demur when you praise them, even in private, I think the effort of recognizing them and seeing that they're doing good work and letting them know that you know and that you're seeing it is important, even if they don't jump up and down and thank you for the recognition. I think it's still human nature to be appreciated in the proper way that works for them.
It's true. Claude, I love the one about executive support. Can we do that one next? Let's do it. It's from Brooke. I love the point you brought up about the importance of listening and acting on employee feedback during this time and in general. But what advice do you have for HR leaders who have executives that don't get it? What are some things we can do to get C-level buy-in and support? I love this one because it's a really common one that we get. It's like, hey, we understand it, but like our leaders don't.
Right.
And like from my perspective, the harsh truth is if your C-suite doesn't get the importance of optimizing the employee experience and employee engagement, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle for a lot of your people initiatives. But that's not to say you're out of luck. The biggest thing I'd say is sometimes there's a little bit of a language gap and a language barrier between HR and C-level executives, in that HR carries the burden of kind of learning to speak a new language by articulating a compelling, numbers-driven, concise business case for how making an investment in continuous listening or recognition can drive overall business success. Like whether your executives right now conceptually get the importance of engagement or not, you can't argue with data, and the data is clear. And I mean, honestly, I think Achievers is amazing, but if you talk to any established engagement vendor, they'll offer you resources and support to help you build that business case so you don't have to start from scratch and you can garner that ongoing support. What do you think, Claude?
Well, I think that the executive support is important. And one of the things that I want to share is I've done almost 100 interviews with companies since the pandemic and this whole thing has unfolded. And I will say that I think the great majority of companies are telling me that the executives are getting it. And even those who maybe weren't getting it before are getting it now. And so we have a great opportunity here. So if you're still got HR executive, or if you got executives that aren't getting it, then I think this is a really good time to maybe broach that difficult topic, because you are in a crisis situation and you're at a point where you can really confront it, I think, maybe a little bit more easily than you would in a normal situation. And secondly, if your executives are showing some, if they're beginning to recognize and they're doing it now, make sure that you reinforce that and recognize them for recognizing people, right? To try to capture that behavior so that it transitions back into the whatever the new normal is. We've got a real opportunity here, because I think people really are feeling that people do need recognition and they need to communicate and they need to reach out. And if we can establish some new habits here and then have a plan for carrying it back into the new normal, I think we can make some real headway. And I'm seeing that a lot of executives are embracing it now. And the key is to get them to agree that and to demonstrate that it's not just a crisis thing. It's good for business, good for relationships in any environment.
Hear, hear.
We just got 1 minute. And there was another question here on how you can change the mindset that recognitions are gifts. And I get that quite often. And there are some companies that started in the recognition realm with a lot of gifts and prizes and and points and those kind of things. But this is a great time to change that mindset because most companies don't have a lot of money to spare. Budgets are tight. People are being laid off, so giving cash awards, it probably isn't very, it's a little tone deaf to do that. So instead, reinforcing the fact that recognition without rewards is beneficial and valuable and helpful, I think can help you change that mindset. Start really focusing on non-reward recognitions now, and then that can carry across back into the post-pandemic new normal, whatever that might be. Absolutely. So we're hitting the top of the hour. I want to give a warm thank you to Brie for everything she did, for doing a great job and a great partner. I want to especially thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy days to join us. We really appreciate you coming out, and we hope this has been valuable. And I hope everybody has a great day. Any last words before we sign off, Brie?
No, I just want to thank you, Claude, and the whole Brandon Hall Group team, especially Danny, and all of our listeners. Thank you so much for taking the time to dial in, and please stay healthy and safe.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.